Hi everyone, welcome back. In this video I thought I'd go through a really comprehensive guide to the GAMSAT and exactly how to study for it, what resources to use and what resources not to use. I'm going to go through how I studied for the GAMSAT as a non-science graduate. I'm going to explain the GAMSAT generally. I'm going to go through sections 1, 2 and 3, explain what they are, and then go through some specific ways to tackle them on the day and also how to prepare for them in the months beforehand. Some of you might know that the GAMSAT is a really long, gruelling, hard day, so I'm going to go through my advice for on the day. Usually I think exam advice is very wishy-washy and not that helpful, but actually there are some things that I'm going to mention that I think really helped me get through the day. Lastly, I'm just going to summarise the resources that I think are really key to help you succeed in the GAMSAT. Those of you who have seen my last video will know that I'm a non-science graduate. I sat the GAMSAT 3 years after doing my A-levels, and I went from basically knowing nothing to getting all my interviews with my GAMSAT score. And I actually scored highest in the science section, which can really help for some of the universities because I think it counts for double if you score the most highly in the science section. So to those of you who are completely new to the GAMSAT, it's an exam required by a handful of medical schools for graduate entry medicine in the UK. The GAMSAT is a 5.5-hour exam. Don't worry, there's an hour break in the middle. That might sound really scary, but don't worry, it's really manageable and time flies by on the day. And the lunch break is enough to refresh you, so yeah. It's split into 3 sections. Section 1 is like a reading section, arts and humanities, poems, and even cartoon interpretation. Section 2 is straight after section 1, and this is the essay section, where you have to write 2 essays within an hour on pre-given themes or ideas. Science section is the longest of the 3, with 110 questions to answer in 3 hours. I would also say the GAMSAT, although heavily based on science in section 3, is also actually quite logic based, so you can usually kind of work out what the answer is without knowing a really difficult equation, if that makes sense. And added to that, I would say always go with your instinct with the question. The GAMSAT is an extremely time-pressured exam. If you don't know the answer, put C, which I'm sure many of you have had before. I think I guessed 15 questions in section 1 and about 30 in section 3, but more on those later. That's the GAMSAT in a nutshell. Don't be too afraid of any of the sections, especially the science section. It's more than manageable if you're organised and keep on top of things and know what you're in for. When I was studying for the GAMSAT, I found that I was quite in the dark and didn't know where to begin. I found the Griffiths GAMSAT review quite helpful, so I can recommend that to you, although it does cost, I can't remember, maybe 20-ish pounds. But hopefully everything I'm going to say in this video covers what you should need to know. So feel free to watch on. I'm just going to briefly go through my study timeline, so if you're in a similar position to me, you can kind of gauge how long you should be studying for the GAMSAT and what kind of timeline might be useful to you. I sat the GAMSAT in March, and I can probably say that I studied very hard for a few months, but my preparation began maybe back in November, although the studying probably wasn't quite as efficient as it could have been, and with Christmas in the way, there was a bit of a gap. So all in all, I guess I did about 3 months good revision or study for the exam. Obviously, this is completely dependent on your background. If you're a science expert, you'll need less time to study, or if you're a humanities and essay writing expert who's a really, really fast reader and you can do science, then you might not need any time at all. So I'm going to go through all the sections very specifically now. As I said before, section 1 is the reading section, which means you've got 100 questions to answer in 100 minutes plus 10 minutes reading time. This section is a complete mishmash of things. It could be reading a long text on a page, to interpreting a poem, interpreting a cartoon, or analysing what certain words mean sometimes. For this section, my main tip would be practice reading difficult texts. It might be quite hard to imagine how you can start to practice that. An easy starter for starting to prepare yourself for this section, I found, was to read the comments section of good newspapers. There you'll find texts that can sometimes be difficult to read or wordy to read, and reading those and having a think about them will get you into the right mindset for answering questions about texts like that, but also prepare you for more worldly topics for the essay section in section 2. I did a law with German law degree, and I was already quite a way through that when I sat the GAMSAT, so I thought I would be quite a good reader, having to get through all those chunky law textbooks, but actually this was my worst section, so don't downplay it. I would really recommend actually putting some study into this one. Question bank wise, for this one I would really recommend the Exam Crackers MCAT 101 Passages Verbal Reasoning book. This is a book that's packed full of questions and difficult texts for you to read, and if you do it under a time pressure, it's very, very accurate to the kind of thing you're going to be doing in the GAMSAT. And there's so many questions in there. I'd really invest in it. I think I paid less than £5 because it's an old book. Finally, for this section, I would recommend the Des O'Neill question packs. The Des O'Neill question packs are really good for section 1 and 3. I didn't really use the one for section 2, but basically I found them online and bought the PDFs of someone because I don't think they're in print anymore, but I think you can actually get them for free now if you do some digging on some forums. I printed and bound the Des O'Neill question packs that I had, and they ended up being like a folder that big, and they were absolutely amazing. That's the one resource I would say to invest in, mainly for section 3, but section 1 was also very good. It's got loads of really complex texts in it, and if you can interpret those and answer those quite quickly, then you'll be more than set. So on the day for section 1, you've got 10 minutes reading time at the start. For those 10 minutes, quickly look through your exam to check that all the pages are there like they always tell you to, but just do that very quickly, and then just start to answer the paper in your head. You're not allowed to write anything in those 10 minutes, but you can read the first few pages and answer them in your head. You should be able to remember the answers for those, and as soon as the 10 minutes are up, you just quickly fill in the answer sheet and then continue where you were answering the questions. That should save you quite a lot of time and give you the chance to go over your answers at the end if you do manage to finish the paper. Section 2 is the essay section, which can either make you feel really happy and excited or absolutely dread it. Section 2 is 60 minutes for 2 essays, and it's up to you how to divide your time for that. There's an essay A and an essay B. Essay A is an objective essay which can be about topics like democracy, politics, the environment and things like that. Essay B is more of a subjective and individual essay, for example, writing an essay on love, hate, friendships or dreaming. The crucial thing for this section is to plan your essays. I spent 5 minutes at the beginning planning essay A and planning essay B. This just consisted of coming up with a title for each essay, which was usually in the form of a question, and then coming up with 4 bullet points. For essay A, I recommend you take a stance, you argue your viewpoint, you use 1 paragraph per idea you're trying to convey. You need to convey everything rationally and with a clear viewpoint. Before you conclude, I'd recommend writing a counter-argument paragraph to really show the examiner that you've thought about both sides of the argument and really finish off the essay strongly. Essay B can be written more as a story, as a trail of thoughts. It's a lot more flexible and it's a bit more up to you. Definitely make sure you keep your paragraphs though, and do include an opinion at the end to finish strongly. The way that the themes for the essays are decided is by a page of quotes each for essay A and essay B. When you read through the quotes, you'll identify a theme, and that's what your essays should be based around. Resource-wise for this section, I've got 2 suggestions. I would really recommend The Meaning of Things by A.C. Grayling for this section. It's a book that has a page or 2 on a specific theme, just like these essays, and it gives an insightful view into the philosophy of life. It's very similar to the quotes the GAMSAT will give you. It's almost like this book was written for students who are taking the GAMSAT. I'd really recommend it. It's quite a nice read actually. It's something you can kind of just do a little bit in your spare time. It won't really feel like GAMSAT revision. Other than the book, I would recommend keeping up with world news and reading a little bit of news every day or other day. I wasn't that well read when I started studying for the GAMSAT, so I read the news quite a lot. Apart from it being really interesting and good to keep up with, it really helped with my reading speed and helped with essay A, as it allowed me to draw upon lots of different things that I've read and produce a really well-rounded and strong essay. In terms of actually writing essays and preparing for this section, I would recommend writing essays periodically and getting someone to read them and review it critically. Don't be afraid to sit there and let them rip your essay to shreds. That's good, it means it will improve. It could also be really good to sit down with them afterwards and just have a chat, have a debate about the theme or topic that you wrote about. They might bring up different ideas that you hadn't even considered, and you can then draw on them in your essays in the future, or even include them in the counter-arguments paragraph at the end. My tip for absolutely smashing this section, as I mentioned before, is the plans. The plans are the most crucial part of the essays. If you've done your plan, all you need to do for the remaining 25 minutes for that essay is expand on them and write the essay using the plan. The first thing I would do when starting section 2 is to identify the theme for essay A. I would then decide what kind of stance I'm going to take, and I would write down a title in the form of a question. After that, I would identify 4 or 5 really strong arguments that are going to then become a paragraph each. I would write those down in bullet points and expand on them if I felt the need to. Once the exam started to get closer, I would stop writing essays out in full and I would get a little notebook and just do as many plans as possible on as many different themes as possible. As I said before, the plans are key, and if you can master writing a really strong plan within 5 minutes on any theme, you will have covered almost anything possible for the exam, and then when you go to write it in the exam, you'll just be pulling it out of your subconscious, and it'll be much easier than having to think of arguments and ideas afresh on the day. Now I'm going to talk about the science section. This is a 3-hour-long paper which comes after your 1-hour lunch break following the morning session. This is comprised of 110 questions, and with a 3-hour exam plus 10 minutes reading time, this equates to roughly 1.5 minutes per question. It's split into biology, chemistry and physics. Biology and chemistry each have roughly 40 questions, and I believe physics is usually only about 30. Which is good news if you're not so good on the physics. As I mentioned before, the GAMSAT is a very time-pressured exam, and this is the section that you're probably not going to finish. I think I put C for 30 of my questions in this part, and as I said before, this is actually my strongest section. The standard of this section is probably roughly the same as AS, A2 level of biology, chemistry and physics. You obviously don't need to know the whole curriculum, and if you answer enough question banks, you'll be able to identify the areas that you haven't quite covered, and you'll be able to identify themes that always comes up. So I wouldn't say it's the same as a whole A-level curriculum. So don't worry about having to learn A-level biochem and physics. In terms of preparation for this section, I'd done a biology A-level about 3 or 4 years prior to it. So for biology, it was just revision for me. And for that, I used my old biology A-level textbook. This one's obviously only AS. So I topped that up with Khan Academy and really just practice questions. There's a fair bit of organic chemistry in the science section. It's about 40 questions. It can be quite a few points. And for this, I used Organic Chemistry for Dummies, which I think worked brilliantly. It's got loads of worked examples, and it really gets you from absolute beginner to being able to answer nearly every organic chemistry question in the exam. As I said before, I did some very light reading and studying 4 to 5 months before the exam, and for the chemistry, I started using Let's Revise AS and A2 chemistry book. I think I actually had the biology one for that too, for A2. And that was really useful just to kind of get me into the swing of answering chemistry questions and going through the basics and building up to slightly harder calculations. I didn't use it too much in the run up to the exam. I think it was a good starter when I had a lot of time to study, but really I think practice questions are the way to go, and using Khan Academy to explain things is really excellent. I think it's always really good to hear things in multiple different ways. For example, if you're only reading from a textbook, the explanation isn't always going to work for you. So Khan Academy might serve as just a different perspective, and it might be explained in a way that will help you understand the topic. I'm a big advocate of practice questions before an exam. Once you know the material, you should be doing practice question after practice question after practice question and do them timed. Although they're very expensive, I would recommend the resources that come with paying for the GAMSAT exam by ASA, I think. Perhaps you can get these from someone else for free if you're sneaky. But yeah, they are very similar to the GAMSAT exam and pitched at the right level depending on the paper they provide you with. So I recommend getting them. And for this section, the one resource I can't recommend enough is the Des O'Neill Section 3 Science Question Bank. As I said before, I printed and bound these, and the science section just had so many questions, a lot of which were really difficult. If you can do these difficult questions and build your level of knowledge up to be able to do this question bank, then I would say you've got a very good shot at doing well in section 3. The best way to tackle section 3 on the day is to play to your strengths. For me, biology was my strongest section, so during the reading time, after checking that every page was there, as you always have to do, I went through and identified all the biology questions. Following that, I identified the organic chemistry questions, which were my second favourite questions. So once I identified the biology questions, I would start to answer them, but I would start to answer them in a fairly relaxed manner given the time constraint. I would really take my time on all the questions I know I can get correct if I allow myself to think about them. I think doing it this way is quite clever because it allows you to dedicate the time to the questions you know you can get correct by borrowing time from the questions you would have guessed at the end anyway, which for me were a lot of the really difficult physics questions. So go through and answer all your favourite questions first, Start to pick up the pace a bit and answer your next favourite topic, perhaps chemistry. Answer all of those, filter in a few of the good physics questions. By that point, you should be coming towards the end of the exam, at which point you know the rest of the questions that you've looked at. You can either have a quick go at, or you know you're just going to have to guess, so you would put C for all of those. But for me, that was 30 questions, and it obviously didn't do me any harm. Okay, now I'm going to mention some resources that I don't recommend. I got the big old gold standard GAMSAT book online for cheap on eBay, and it's one resource I don't really recommend. It was useful for explaining some topics or ideas to me for section 3, but I wouldn't really recommend it for the price. And if you buy it online off someone, it won't come with the online code, which gets you extra questions and just additional content and things. I think you're much better off buying the Des O'Neill question pack PDFs from someone, or trying to find them for free. Those would only cost you 15 quid if someone's selling them. All the resources that I've mentioned are more than enough to do really well in the GAMSAT. I don't think the gold standard GAMSAT book gives you anything these resources don't. Once you've started to understand the basic concepts for the GAMSAT, it's just about drawing the questions, and that's something this book doesn't give you. I also had the Aussie Med resources. They looked okay. I didn't really use them that much. Everything else that I had was more than enough question bank wise, so I just got on with those. And there comes a point where you've just got too many resources and you just need to focus on what you've got and just actually start revising. I think it was overload to get the Aussie Med resources, but they might work for you. If you don't want to get anything else, then what I've mentioned is more than enough. I just thought I'd talk about the day generally and some small bits of advice that I think really helped me to stay calm on the day, but also stay kind of like powered up to tackle the exam. I'm not a heavy coffee drinker, but I do like to have a coffee in the morning, and exam day is no exception to that, but with a twist. I would recommend getting a pack of Pro Plus. I think one Pro Plus tablet is like a week coffee, and taking a Pro Plus half an hour before the morning session starts. You really don't want to have a coffee in that time. The exam is so time pressured that you can't afford to go for a wee in the middle of the paper. Having a Pro Plus will get your brain powered up and not make you need to run to the toilet. I have heard that it's been proven that coffee can help your brain work on a higher level, so although taking a Pro Plus before the exam might seem really menial, every point counts. As you may know, the GAMSAT is only really held in large cities, and so this will probably mean you have to travel unless you're lucky enough to live nearby. It's very obvious for me to say it, but give yourself more than enough time to arrive. There's usually loads of people to register, and it's going to be stressful arriving at the end of the queue. I can't remember if I sat the GAMSAT on a weekend or not, but the GAMSAT will be starting around rush hour time, which is worth bearing in mind. The exam halls can often be quite cold, and so I'd recommend taking a warm jumper to your seat. Importantly, try out your jumpers before and see which jumpers are comfortable at the risk for writing. If you've got a jumper or a jacket with a bit of a big cuff or sleeve, it can get in the way of your writing, and it can actually slow you down a lot on the essay section, which can be not only irritating but cost you time, which is of the essence in this exam. To be comprehensive, I thought I'd just add in as well, don't forget to take water to your seat, take a rubber and multiple pens and pencils. You might feel really burnt out after the Humanities section in section 1, but I would say at lunch, do go and chat to people and socialise. Have a look around the room. There's bound to be some approachable people that you can just go and have a chat with or just sit with. And although you might not feel like socialising, I think it can really help calm your nerves and talk to people who are in the same boat as you. Everyone there is likely to be just as stressed and anxious as you, even if it's not showing outwardly. It's worth noting that the medicine applications don't end with the GAMSAT, it's the start. It's one of the biggest hurdles, but it is only the start. And if you've been going at it alone so far, this is a perfect opportunity to make some friends who you can chat to along the application process and talk to about interviews and the like. So don't forget to exchange numbers with them at the end of the day. Overall, the GAMSAT is about resilience. Try and take the GAMSAT as a step-by-step process. Try to plan a few months in advance if you can, to allow you to fit in any extra studying you might need to do once you've identified your weak areas. It's always nice to start your studies early so you can do it in a more relaxed way rather than cramming nearer the time. I guess it depends on your style. As I mentioned before, I felt very in the dark when preparing for the GAMSAT. It was quite stressful, and I ended up saying to myself, keep going but see it as a dry run. I remember reading that quite a few people do a practice run with the GAMSAT. Obviously this depends if you're able and willing to work a few extra hours to be able to save up for another sitting. I think it was kind of useful having this mindset because it helped me sit the GAMSAT in a really relaxed way, but in a confident way, as it was kind of like a no holds barred thing. And I could just go full steam ahead and really go for the GAMSAT without being scared about failing, if that makes sense. Overall, I would say if you follow all of these tips and use the resources that I've mentioned, plus minus a few of your own, depending on your learning style or what your background is, that you'd have a very good shot at doing well at the GAMSAT. I'm just going to concisely bring together all the resources that I think can put you in a really strong position to scoring highly in the GAMSAT. First of all, the ACER GAMSAT practice papers that come with registering for the exam. For section 1, in terms of preparation, reading the comment section of good newspapers. In terms of practicing questions in a real exam setting, the Exam Crackers 101 MCAT Verbal Reasoning book and the Des O'Neill section 1 question bank. For section 2, get AC Grayling's The Meaning of Things book and read the world news. Don't forget to practice the essays as well as doing wider reading and focusing down on getting those really good plans. For section 3, get the Des O'Neill question books, print them and bind them. Organic Chemistry for Dummies is probably worth getting for anyone. It's a really good question bank for general practice, on top of the questions I've mentioned before. And finally, the Let's AQA textbooks for biology, chemistry and physics, A2 and AS level. So that's everything I have to say about studying for the GAMSAT. If you follow all of those tips and stay focused and plan and prepare, you've got a very good chance of scoring highly and getting interviews at your medical schools. If you want to find out more about how to get into medical school as a graduate, feel free to check out my other video on how I got into medical school as a non-science grad. If you enjoyed this video, please do show support by liking and subscribing below, and I'll see you next time.